for SAFN. I just wanted to come in to do a very quick intro for the next session here that we're going to have, which is on green finance for agri-SMEs. And the idea behind this session in particular is sort of building on the general theme of this SAFN plenary, which is trying to find opportunities in times of crisis, and trying to understand also that amongst the various crises that we're seeing, there's always a risk that green finance, which continues to be a bit of an emergency and something that we need to be addressing with as many resources as we can in terms of solutions, et cetera, drops a little bit by the wayside as resources are, redistributed to target some of the other crises that are emerging. And so one of the key questions that we want to answer here is, how do we keep green finance at the top of the agenda? And also, how do we continue to work towards trying to identify solutions that are scalable and can really sort of generate the greater impact that we need to see? So we're going to have a panel session here that's going to be moderated by Azeta Cungu from FAO and CABFIN. So I'll pass it on to you now, Azeta. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Michael, for introducing the topic of today's session and for handing this over to me. Good morning and good afternoon. I don't know, depending on where you are in the world right now. I am Azeta Cungu. I'm Rural Finance Officer for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, the FAO, and I'm based in Rome. I'm also a member of the CABFIN partnership, which is a rural finance partnership that it's long-standing. It's been around for quite a while, over 20 years now, I think. And it brings together experts from about 6 international organizations to push the agenda for inclusive finance through knowledge and capacity development, generating and managing knowledge, and also feeding that into the various processes at regional, global, country level to strengthen capacities. The agencies that are represented at the moment in CABFIN are the FAO, IFAD, GIZ, the World Bank, the World Food Programme, and the UNCDF, and we also have CGAP as an observer. So I've been invited by our colleagues in SAFN to moderate this session today, so I take this opportunity to thank them once again. I'm really honored to do that, and to welcome everybody to the session. Thanks for taking the time to sit here with us, and then eventually for sharing your thoughts. I think Michael did a very good job in introducing the session, talking about what the focus is going to be and the objectives. I would just then reiterate 2 things, that we will be looking at, the challenges in today's session, the challenges of bringing climate and green finance to the agricultural sector, to the food systems actors, with a special focus on the agri-SMEs, but also on the other players like farmers and other actors in the food system. As we all know, in order to achieve the very ambitious objectives and agenda set out by the SDGs, by the Paris Agreement, and the more recent climate agreements, we need to see green and climate finance being deployed really and happening at all levels. And all of this now needs to happen in a context where, as Michael mentioned, there is crisis after crisis after crisis, which inevitably leads to then rethinking, reprioritization, different allocation of resources that are already rather scarce. And so the question is, how do we keep this at the top of the agenda of the policymakers, of the funders, and other stakeholders? And then what are the kinds of things that we need to do in order to move a little bit more quickly and at a larger scale? To do this today, we have invited 3 experts who are going to be our guest speakers and panelists. I'm going to introduce them in a bit, but basically, I think I'm going to just say a couple of words on the process, how it's going to go. So we will have a presentation for like 10 to 12, 15 minutes maximum, and then we'll have panel discussions. And then in the end, we'll open up the discussions for interaction with the rest of the audience. So please keep your comments or questions for the very end. Write them down in the chat in this dedicated section on comments. And we will also be taking questions from the colleagues who are present in the room there in Mexico periodically, every now and then we'll be able to do that. So let me, without further ado, get on with it now by introducing the speaker, Mr. Alejandro Escobar. I'm just going to read. Of course, Alejandro is lead agricultural specialist, and he works for the Inter-American Development Bank. He's based in Washington, D.C. He has been working in agricultural development, including finance, for over 20 years. Currently, he is responsible for the sustainable agriculture portfolio of projects in ADB, value chain development and financing of farmer cooperatives throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. Alejandro will be presenting briefly some experiences, some relevant experiences from Latin America and some work that has been done in the framework of AADB's private sector lab window. So he'll be talking about, some lessons and some findings from that work. I'm happy to hand over to Alejandro for his presentation. Alejandro, the floor is yours, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to this panel, Safin. So far, yesterday, today, I've enjoyed every single presentation. It's been very useful, and I hope it's been useful for all of us here present and those attending online. I work within the IDB in a group called the IDB Lab, which is a private sector window of the bank. We do work with civil society as well as private sector actors, financial and non-financial. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about my particular experience within the IDB Lab. The bank, as the general bank, the development bank in the region, does a lot of work around green finance. We've done a lot of work on supporting local financial institutions and issuing bonds, green bonds. We've had one here with FIRA and several here in Mexico, Argentina, and Brazil. So I'm not going to be delving into what we've done at that level with the public sector and some of the development banks. But I will talk a little bit about what we've been doing from the lab with some of the private sector partners that we have. Yet at the same time, as I mentioned, the bank's involvement in green finance, I appreciated very much our discussion yesterday around the definitions and the things that we define as green finance, because I think it's important because it's such a relevant topic that we have and we strive to understand what green finance is. I would dare to say that most of the work that we've been doing has actually been adaptation finance. And most of what we're doing is adaptation finance. So having and the work that Safin has done on the taxonomy, I think is great. It's a great start. These tools, I highly recommend you look at these because it gives us a framework as to how to approach and think through what green finance really is. As we implement projects, we are a project implementing type of organization within the IDB Lab. As we implement some of these green finance projects, we ask ourselves these questions: what is exactly green finance? And to understand what green finance is in the region, and what it means for some of the countries that we're working in. Because I think also each country has their own goals, their own understanding of what green finance is. But I think it's important for us as a development bank and institutions here present today, understanding what those definitions. I placed a couple images there. I have only 2 slides that I want to share with you today, which help me explain to you what is it that we're looking at and the challenges and some of the issues that we're facing. When I think of green finance, I think of lending, and I think of long-term lending. Green finance, I would say, is characterized because we want to help those who are receiving the financing adapt using technology, most time, to differences and changes that are happening because of climate. So there's a very strong climate component, but the financing tools are tools that we would characterize as medium to long-term loans. And this is important. And I have this picture here, this image of a banana plantation in Honduras that we visited a few weeks ago, who is precisely in this moment transitioning their energy systems into solar. And the main reason they're doing this, is a cost-related issue. Businesses, agri-SMEs, face twice the cost as their similar counterparts in the US. So the cost per kilowatt in Honduras is twice that in the US, and for countries like El Salvador and Guatemala, it's 3 to 4 times the cost of the US. So there's a natural need for SMEs and agri-SMEs to reduce their cost. And solar, and not just the cost, but those of us who have lived in Honduras or have been in Honduras, I'm looking at Lorna here, don't understand that the continuity of electricity during the day is important because light energy just, because of the blackout. So there's a demand for a clean, renewable energy, in this case, as a small farmer, a medium-sized farmer, because this banana plantation is definitely a medium-sized farm. But the decisions are based on cost and medium-term outlook for their business. How am I going to survive growing bananas in the long term? So energy efficiency being one of the key things that are necessary to address. And Honduras, in particular, many of the Central American countries have energy at the top of their agenda, which is why green finance is not, I would say, it's important for them and in their system. I should emphasize that in a country like Honduras, Honduras has several so-called green lines of credit too. So a company like this may have access to green finance through Banprovi or the state development banks. But what we've discovered is that a lot of these lines of credit have pretty much the same terms as any other commercial lines of credit. So there's really not that much differentiation, even though they are specifically meant to address climate challenges. And this is one of the things that we're seeing in the region, is that many banks in the region, Peru, I was there too, and Peru has a number of lines of credit for green finance. So in respect of availability of funding, I think much of it is there, but the conditions under which they're being offered continue to be a challenge. And I think this is one of the things that we are seeing from the bank's perspective. How can we better bridge that gap between the supply of credit that is available and the demand, which we just mentioned. One of the things we discovered too in some of these countries is the relative, the maturity of the technology sector, the technology sectors that are providing the technology. So solar panel manufacturers, irrigation equipment manufacturers, and then ag tech companies that are providing some of the solutions as well. So we are seeing that the demand for these services really is there, but the supply of the technology may not be quite there yet. So we may have a line of credit for $30 million to support solar integration, but there's just not enough technology there to provide this. And this is what we're seeing. In fact, green finance is available, but the technology that is necessary for the farmers and the SMEs to adapt to climate may not quite be there. And so we ask ourselves the questions, maybe our efforts should be oriented towards those companies, the companies that are providing the technology. What are their needs? What are their gaps that they see in their markets? Again, we're talking about SMEs here. It's important because if we were to talk of the larger corporations, the vertically integrated agricultural firms in Peru, they can supply themselves with financing for solar or other sources on their own. But we're talking here about SMEs and small farmers, right? So this is the sector that we see there's still a strong gap in offering technology. And when I say technology, again, I mean renewable energy efficiency, technology, and so forth. I think I went a little forward here. Anyway, the other thing we have noticed, and I think is important to mention, is the role of aggregators. And this was mentioned already in the panels today. And I was glad to hear Responsibility and Alterfing talk about this because they work with many of these aggregators. The aggregators are probably one of the best venues to reach small farmers with financing. An aggregator, a cooperative, an SME may have access to commercial loans for adaptation, but for sure small farmers don't. And for sure, they may not even qualify if we talk strictly in the sense of a climate. What is a climate loan? Again, it's a loan that is a 2-3 year loan. The banana plantation that we were talking about before, it's going to cost them $80,000 to implement their solar technology. But they will make that up in 2 years from the energy savings that they're going to be experiencing on a monthly basis. But a small farmer would probably does not going to have the cash flow necessary to pay for that technology that he needs to implement his climate adaptation. So where does the aggregator come in? The aggregator plays this role providing not only the credit, but the technology knowledge necessary to implement a proper climate adaptation technology. And I love this example here. If you look at the picture, it's a beautiful picture of my country, Peru. Yes, you can see. But if you look up, this is a very, very real problem and issue in Peru, but not only in Peru, but in Bolivia. If you look at the snow caps in that picture, you can barely see any snow. 10 years ago, those mountains would have been covered with snow. And that snow that melts is the water that is used for irrigating pastures like this for alpaca and llama production and exports. Peru is the largest exporter of alpaca fiber in the world. And alpaca growers, like the person there represented, production is slowly declining. And it's slowly declining because of what? Because of water. Other big important factor. Not only are the glaciers melting, but so far, up until now, the farmers have been used to flooding irrigation. Very little use of irrigation. And if you look carefully at that picture right next to the farmer, he has an aspersion water resource. So he's actually implemented irrigation, smart irrigation, and he has a lagoon. He has a small lagoon there where he's collecting water. But this is not the typical way. So implementing this technology here would probably cost a farmer about $4,000. This is what I call climate finance. This is really climate finance. It's not working capital. It's not a capital that is needed just to the exports. It's this kind of financing that is much needed in countries like Peru, Ecuador, the Andean countries, where we're seeing some of these water issues. I don't need to emphasize, and perhaps when the question was raised, how do we bring SME financing? How do we bring green finance to the top of the agenda? This is we are in a very critical area. Why? Mainly because of water. Water usage in Latin America. Most of the countries have 70% of the water in the countries is used for agriculture. And in Chile, what's happening in Chile now is what's going to happen in some of the other countries in the next few years, decades. There's going to be a scarcity problem of water. And there's already deficits in countries that are highly exported-oriented as Chile. There's already a deficit of water. And in countries like Peru, Bolivia, Paraguay, even Argentina, water will be the issue, the climate issue in the coming years. So how do we help small farmers? How do we help aggregators adapt to these issues of water and energy? Again, two main issues that I think are they're not necessarily things that politicians and governments prioritize because they're not very sexy, but they're very, very critical. And I think part of our responsibility, part of our work is to build this narrative of the importance of what we call green SME finance. And it's the financing that is more important even so than the subsidies, because the subsidies will be there. Believe me, the subsidies will be there. In the case of Peru, the Peruvian government had a program where they were literally donating some of the grass seeds that you see there in that picture. But that is not the solution. Number one, they gave the wrong seed out. This is a typical problem, right, in our country. So they give out the wrong seed, that grass dies within a year, even with water. So who has a better understanding of what grass is needed for the pastures? The aggregators. and the aggregators who are strongly linked to the markets, who understand what kind of grass is needed there, what kind of irrigation you need. So the role of the aggregators, and this is a message that I constantly bring to my own organization, the bank, is critical. It is critical. It's not, yes, they are private sector, and yes, they are often working in very specific value chains, but I think the public good that comes out of the work that they do with the value chains that they're involved is very relevant. I don't want to take much time more already, I think taking my 10 minutes, but I just wanted to emphasize these things. Many of the countries have very critical climate issues. The green finance for agri-SMEs that we're looking at, I would tend to call them adaptation finance, and this is what I think we should really think about. And then we should also work, just like it was mentioned in the panel before, on those additional services and the services that do need some subsidy to bridge that gap between the demand and what is offered, existingly offered by the financial institutions. And I think with that, I'll wrap it. The poll, yes. So we're going to have a poll in this panel. For those of you who are online, there's going to be a question asked, and we ask that you please, in as much as you can, respond, which will help us also even in the discussion here, but also going forward as we prepare for other panels. We would like to hear your response. Back to you, Azeta.
Azeta, thank you. Thank you very much, Alejandro, for your presentation, first of all. Very much grounded on realities in the countries there. And actually, it's interesting, very interesting what you're saying about the role of the aggregator firms. It goes to prove right a lot of the colleagues who have been saying that value chain finance has really a great potential for bringing green finance to the food system actors, including the small scale actors like farmers and the other little guys in the food system there. So Paul, I think Fabiana was going to help us with that. There are two questions there. Fabiana was going to post them, I think, in the chat. How are we going about that now, Fabiana? Are you ready? Hello?
Yes. I think it is. Yeah.
Hi, Azeta. I'm in Mexico, and I'll be reading out the results of the poll as they come in. We've already launched the first question. If you like, I can go ahead and read it out.
Please go ahead. Yes.
So, what type of institution would you prioritize working with to implement climate finance for agri-SMEs? So at the moment, we have 100% commercial banks. Let's give it a few more minutes, perhaps. So I'll read out the choices for the group here in Mexico. So we have commercial banks, MFIs, fintech companies, corporates, DFIs, NGOs, and local governments. Shall I read those out one more time? Maybe we could have a poll here in Mexico as well.
Yeah.
Oh, of course, we are happy to hear more input. So I'll read the questions, the responses again. Commercial banks, MFIs, fintech companies, corporates, DFIs, NGOs, and local governments. If you have any thoughts in the room, please go ahead and share them. Right now, online, we have 25% commercial banks, 25% MFIs, 25% NGOs, and 25% local governments. Any thoughts from the room? Use the mic. They can't hear you. Go ahead, Prasun. I don't think they can hear you online.
Yeah, no, actually, the commercial bank is the vehicle for scaling up. But to start with, it should be starting from the NGOs or the MFIs, NBFIs also, and fintech companies. So the fintechs have the more reach out, but to scale it up, we need the commercial banks. Yeah, thank you.
Any other thoughts from the room? Okay, I'll give you a quick update. Online, nothing has changed. 25% for each one: commercial banks, MFIs, NGOs, and local governments. Back to you, Azeta. Okay, so we have a second question that is, what best describes your institution's relationship with green finance for agri-SMEs? So the response options are either you're an international provider, so public or development sector, an international provider in the private sector, a local provider in the public or the development sector, a local provider in the private sector, an advisor or implementer, or a recipient. What relationships do we have to green finance? Any thoughts from the room? Yeah, we want to just get a sense of what your relationship is. So right now online, we don't have any responses. Please go ahead and respond if you have any. Right now, we have one advisor or implementer online in the room. Yes, please go ahead. Yeah, let's give them time. Back to you, Azeta.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks for doing this. It was a little bit lost because I couldn't follow. I couldn't see any of these in the screen. So thanks for doing that. Now I think we better open our panel discussions. I will start by introducing our distinguished panelists. Of course, Alejandro will be a part of the panel, but we also have Mariël Mensink and Prasun Kumar Das. Mariël is Rural Finance Advisor for Fair and Sustainable Consulting based in Utrecht, the Netherlands. Prasun is the General Secretary of APRACA, the Rural Agricultural Credit Association of Asia and the Pacific region. Both Mariël and Prasun have decades really of experience in agriculture and rural finance at all levels, global, regional, and country level. So thank you, all three of you, and for sharing your time and your thinking with us. We will go immediately to the questions. We had 4 questions that were suggested, prepared to us by our SAFIN colleagues. So thank you for that, Michael, and your colleagues there. The first question is for Alejandro, building on the presentation that you just delivered. So Alejandro, one of the key priorities that we as a community of practice have is to move in quickly to bring, as we said, green finance, climate finance to the agri-food actors. And to do so, to make sure that these resources are reaching the right actors, they are enabling the right types of investments, they are also coming in at the right speed and at the right scale, okay? So the question for you is that given that all of this needs to happen in a context of crisis, which is now changing continuously the needs, shifting the priorities and so on, how do we keep climate finance for agriculture at the top of the agenda? And is there any experiences from your institution that you could share with us in relation to that? Over to you. Thank you.
I think, like I mentioned before, I think what COVID has done to all of the governments in the region has built a sense of trying to understand how governments and their instruments can quickly react to situations of extreme stress on government resources. I would say that I'm not familiar with the rest of the world, but in Latin America, many of the countries adapted fairly quickly in terms of financing. I'm speaking about the experiences I know in COFIDE, for example, in Peru. Many of these institutions quickly reacted with financing to support SMEs that were in stress. To me, that's a signal that there's a common understanding of urgency and of the urgency of issues like health and COVID, but climate is right after it. And if there's something that the war in Ukraine, the discussions in Egypt that the governments have been following, is that yes, there is a need to address these issues, but where the gap is understanding how financing plays this role in addressing some of these issues. So I think it's a matter of supporting and helping build this narrative of the urgency of what's happening, again, with water issues, with energy issues, and how, if we don't take action now, we will have serious problems in the years to come. So I strongly believe that there's more openness than ever now to have this issue at the forefront, even though it's one that's a difficult one to take by governments and agencies. But I think there's a lot of room now and an opportunity. I think a big opportunity, particularly for organizations like ours, to bring this narrative forth, to bring it forth to the attention of the governments in the region.
Thank you. I think we need to move on without further delay. And please, I would ask those intervening afterwards to keep their contributions really short, about 2 minutes, please, because we are running really much over time. So I'm moving on to Prasun. This one is for you, Prasun. So APRACA, the institution you're working for, is an umbrella organization that has members about, 89, 90 institutions from around 24 countries in Asia and the Pacific, and most of them, if I'm not mistaken, are financial service providers. So you are very well aware then of the kinds of the perspectives of the supply side actors and the challenges that they face. Now, given this, the question for you is, in your opinion, what type of interventions and partnerships can be successful for scaling actions and should be prioritized, considering the emergency of the matter and the limited concession of resources available? If you could share any examples of models that work. Thank you, Prasun. Very concise, please.
Thank you, Azeta, for the question. Actually, no, you were right that we are working with 24 countries across the region. And mostly we are working with the policy, like the central banks, and also the development financial institution, commercial banks as well. So all of them are financial service providers as well as financial policy providers. So we are not limiting my response only to the services, but also to the policies. Basically, what we found in our last 4 years of our interaction and conversation with the central bankers and the financial service providers, that there are three or four areas of really the gray kind of areas where we need to be more precise and more concentrating. First of all, in Asia, we do not have a taxonomy, which I also agree with Alejandro that a taxonomy is very important in this our case. We do have countries like China. They have developed their own taxonomy, but we do not have a common taxonomy like European Union. So we are trying to have a common taxonomy for the sub-regions, whatever we have. And but the central bankers are actually looking forward to do that. The second issue with the financial service providers are the incentives. As Alejandro was telling, that it is a very important fact that where we finance and which one we will call as a green, because our bankers are doing the same thing for last 50 years, and still we are telling them that they are not green. So which one will be the green? So that and what are the incentives for greening the agriculture and the SME sector? That is important for all of us. So what we were, and the third one, what we found that the technology, which everybody is talking about the green technology, but unfortunately it is not grounded. In Asia, there are countries, for example, as Azeta was asking me about the examples. We have examples, many examples. For example, we have in Cambodia, we do have many technologies, for example, solar or bio and all these technologies, but the technologies are not grounded because the cadres are not prepared. There are no cadres who will be supporting this kind of a technology. But so when a bank is going to finance, they are asking the sustainability of that finance. If it is a long-term 5 years or 7 years financing, they need a continuous repayment back, and that repayment depends on the sustainability of that particular technology and how they upgrade the technology on the ground. So this is the third one. And the fourth one, we are yet to finalize or activate the escalators of green finance. One point I fully agree with Alejandro is the aggregator, but at the same time, we do have the another one is the information and the capacity of the financial institutions to accept this as a green and also go for longer term or maybe medium term adaptation finance. The second one is the collaboration. Collaboration between the central bankers, the NGOs, the local NGOs, and the local bankers, the MFIs, NBFIs, which actually we are missing. They are basically missing in the whole process. So the new project we are working with the International Climate Initiative is working with the local bankers or the MFIs on developing the climate finance product and instrument, which will be local and also will have a regional impact and attracting the private sector. So the third escalator is the collaboration of the private sector and the public sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prasun. Very insightful as usual. Then question 3 is for Mariël, and I would like to ask her about the key issues that you are seeing in your work on the ground, in terms of the access of rural and agricultural stakeholders to green finance, especially looking at the SMEs and the farmers out there, and what approaches and which actors or recipients should we prioritize in order to scale finance. Over to you, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I must say, I hope you can hear me. My experience is mostly with green finance, financial services in African countries. And I want to make one point. I think if we want to make a meaningful contribution, we have to both scale and have eye for the details. What I mean with that is we recently organized a conference on green finance in one of the African countries. And what was clearly there is that the farmers on the ground, the SMEs, are not participating in the green developments. And there are 3 main reasons for that. One is the access to knowledge, understanding, in having simple tools to bring them along so that they can understand what is green finance, and how they can capture it. The second one is technology, which was mentioned by others also. But we see also on the level of aggregators, which are the cooperatives, the microfinance institutions we work with, they don't have the technology to actually come along with what they need to measure and register the green finance. And the last one is access to long-term finance. And that especially if you talk about adaptation, but also maybe sometimes linked to mitigation strategies, you need longer term investments in irrigation, in water harvesting technologies, in agroforestry. And these require long-term finance, which is considered to be at all levels by the impact investors, but also by the local financial service providers as too high risk. So that is a very big constraint. What we are trying to do is to connect two new initiatives to see if, for example, the carbon market, which is now highly in demand by bigger companies who want to buy carbon credits. We want to see if that carbon market can also help to liberate long-term financing to farmers. But this is just a new idea, and it's quite difficult. And what I've noticed, I also think that public-private partnerships are very needed in this. But I also noticed that the private sector, the microfinance institutions, the small and medium enterprises are very much afraid of too bureaucratic procedures and control by government. So I think there is a need for a much smoother system of collaboration whereby we private and public sectors collaborate as equal partners. And this is I think something that is that we have to find, and maybe Safin can play a role in this, but this is one of the criteria I see. So knowledge, technology and long-term finance have been a very big constraint, and both at all levels, for farmers, for SMEs, and for bigger organizations. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mariël. Really useful. I mean, it's interesting what you're saying about long-term finance. Clearly, this is the big issue. It's critical for investment. It's critical for climate smart green investments as well for the farmers. It's interesting, I think, to discuss how that could happen at the scale that we need it to, in a context where incentives still continue to be so distorted by prices that don't reflect the real values and costs. But anyway, this is a discussion for some other time, I think. Question number 4 is for all panelists. And here, Michael has asked, what can Safin do to make most efficient use of its limited resources and of its network partners to make a difference in this area? So it's for all 3 of you. Who wants to start? Have a go. Can I pick? Okay, let's use the same order. We start with Alejandro. Please, Alejandro.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just going to clarify, because as I was hearing you guys speak and also hearing some of the prior discussions, I was also thinking there's a lot of discussion on essentially just impact and what can create the greatest impact. So in terms of this question here, Safin, given the breadth and diversity of its network, the size of its actual capacity to make changes, what can it do, or how should it engage in order to make the greatest impact given the urgency to address the matter?
A tough question for an organization that we're a part of too, but I think it was mentioned yesterday too. I think focusing and bringing a little more strategy around the particular issues that are being raised. And all of these issues are strategic, but there's only so much we can cover. And so I think there is merit in selecting issues that are more easily identifiable, and perhaps sticking to 2 or 3 key thematic areas that could support the different regions of the world. I also heard yesterday a little bit the idea of having regional hubs. I think this is also important for what was expressed. The Latin Americans perhaps may be more interested in one particular topic, Asia, perhaps something different. But I think, so gauging a little bit what could be the possibility of regional discussions, and then having like a once a year meeting like this to share these would be optimal. But I think focusing on some of the issues would also attract more participants into SAFIN, I think. So there's a lot of really demanding issues that we've discussed, the role of the financial institutions. I did not want to diminish that, but there's a lot of interest from the financial institutions networks to understand how can they prepare pipeline, identify solutions. What is their role beyond just signing the check and issuing the loans? So I would say try to focus on 2 or 3 issues in the coming years, and thinking about this regional hub idea. I think it's interesting.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. Sorry, you were finished, right?
Should I go ahead? Azeta?
Yes, Prasun. Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So to me, SAFIN can play a very important role, as I was telling about the escalator. So SAFIN, I would like to see SAFIN as an escalator to the paradigm shift. From a demand, when supply driven like a push financial market towards a pool financial market, where the demand should come from the people, those who require it, rather than it should go from the central bankers or the development financial institution to offload their capital. They have the liquidity in the system. So that is the most important role as an escalator SAFIN can do. And as an escalator, as I say, that the knowledge is what we are doing currently. We are doing the collaboration. So all of the part of this. So that's the only thing I would see SAFIN should do now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Prasun. And Mariël, please.
Yeah, thank you. I mentioned one issue already. Yeah, it could be interesting to have indeed regional hubs, but I think it's also good that SAFIN can play a role in knowledge sharing, as you do in this conference. And I don't know if there is a role in bringing public and private actors much more together in a collaborative way. I would like to also encourage SAFIN particularly to be more visible in Africa, because I think that is where I've not really seen it happening a lot. That is my contribution. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mariël and Prasun and Alejandro, for sharing your thoughts with us today. It's been really interesting. I think we have about 10-15 minutes to have to interact with the broader audience, to take more questions. I think there is no point for me to just go now and make a summary of what was discussed, the things that we heard today. It was very rich, but I think the session, Emily just confirmed to me that the session is being recorded, and perhaps whoever has an interest to go over some of these ideas again, that recording can be made available. So we're taking questions now from the chat and also from the audience who is there live in Mexico. Should we start with, should we then start by taking some questions from the room, Michael, since so far we don't have any from the audience in the chat yet. They are coming.
Yep, absolutely. And we have a first question here from Lorna Grace from IFAD.
Thank you all for your presentations. I just wanted to make a comment first. Thank you for emphasizing the difference between funding for climate and financing the demand for climate. I think that's important because that should be our narrative, because we often conflate the funding and the actual demand for the finance. And I'm reminded of that CGAP publication several years ago that said water, water everywhere and nothing to drink. And that's how I'm feeling that this climate narrative is sort of not us, but in other places that the ones who are supplying the funds. Mike, I do have a question, or sort of a question. I want to know a little bit more about how Safin, if anyone, can influence the taxonomy. You both mentioned taxonomy as being important, and you mentioned that sometimes there's country taxonomies for climate and green finance. We in EFAD are doing a taxonomy for climate and green, and it's in draft form. And I know that Safin, we could definitely get that influence from Safin into ours. I don't know if it works the other way, how taxonomies are really developed. And so I don't know if you had any thoughts on that. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, Michael, are we responding immediately, or we are collecting a couple of more questions?
If there's any other questions in the room, we can probably take those now.
Okay. So what say you, since you are there and you can see who wants to talk?
Yeah, so we'll have one more. I will just answer Lorna's question first. I think that it's an interesting one, and unfortunately I'm going to have to dodge it because it's the question of doing a taxonomy came up when we talked about the learning agenda, and it was one of the activities that we had proposed to take on. And I can't remember if it was the SteerCo or if it was wider SAFIN membership basically nixed it. And the reason for that, I think, was essentially that it wasn't SAFIN's position to be defining anything around green for other countries, other institutions, etc., but also highlighting the complexity of the taxonomy in terms of its application at a regional level, especially. And I've heard some really interesting examples of how just the mere definition of a forest in Brazil as compared to what it is in Germany, just legally, just makes the definition of a taxonomy that applies globally extremely difficult. And that was just one example, but I think the global level makes it difficult. So maybe now that we're talking more at a regional level, we could play more of a role, but I think that's still to be discussed. And I think it's something that the broader membership should also sort of speak on. Prasun wanted to say something.
Just want to add what Michael already said, that what actually we have when we have the conversation with our central bank members, they say the taxonomy, if we have a taxonomy which is a national level, approved by the central banks or the ministries or the line departments, then it comes with two things. One, we call it the carrot and the sticks. So the carrots are what are the incentives? So if we are doing something green, what is the incentive? So the taxonomies, when they are trying to define the green to agriculture, SMEs, or energy, or other sectors, they have to also provide something which are either carrot or stick, like which you cannot do or which you can do. For example, greenwashing. So greenwashing is one of the major issues in most of the countries, especially in the countries in Asia. So that's become a very big issue for each of the nations. So what we are also engaging with our members on defining the taxonomy and supporting them to define the taxonomies of their own country. And in case required, we can go for the sub-regional level, but regional level taxonomy is really, really difficult especially in case of Asia. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Prasun. Do we have any other questions there? Because we continue not to see much in the chat.
So we do have another question. I just wanted to add one last thing. Just one idea that I think would be worth exploring for us is that we do have an agri-SME taxonomy. And I think that there is potential there to essentially leverage at least what we understand as agri-SMEs and how green would apply to them in terms of their activities, et cetera. So maybe it's not a taxonomy on green, but it's leveraging what we do have to apply green and understand how it would work best. Sorry, that's my final point on that. Hernan, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. I would like just to reflect and connect two things that are being said. On one hand, you talked about the need for knowledge, technology, and long-term finance. That's all very clear. But I really want to connect this with what Prasun and Alejandro are also saying. They are clearly talking about incentives and the business model. And we must not forget the business model as one of the key incentives. And it's business for the farmer as well, right? In order to adopt any of these adaptation solutions and to make the green finance work. Even Mariël, you're talking about carbon credits as a means to co-finance. If there's no underlying business model for the farmers that have to adopt this type of insetting or offsetting, it will not work, right? So it's just a call for all of us to really not forget this fourth dimension when we are planning, when we are implementing, and when we are trying to understand the solutions in relation to green finance. Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions or comments? I thought I saw somebody raising the hand in the room.
No, just
Thank
piggybacking
you.
off that. Would you mind sharing an example of a project that actually was sustainable and done in a business manner around green financing? Do you have any examples that you could share?
And is that in terms of like commercial success?
Commercial.
Yeah, we do have examples. For example, in especially in Indonesia, we do have a small grant received from IFAD long back in 2014-15, and then we implemented a small project with them on or with the fisher folks in a small island of Lombok. And what we have found that the green finance, which we are calling it as a green finance, but it's basically the adaptation finance. I think Alejandro already to clear. There should be some clarification over what is a green finance and adaptation finance. So basically, this adaptation finance, what we have done both in Indonesia, in Lombok Island, and also in the Baguio city in the Philippines, both have given us some kind of idea that the technologies, the green technologies, are basically will be the driver for this business model. So if you are bringing the technology which are affordable, accessible, and then only your business model will run. Otherwise, any financial business model without a green technology, which are with having 3 A's, will not work. So that's we have the experience of working in these two countries.
Thank you very much, Prasun. I suggest that we close here, and because we have been taking about more than 5 minutes from the other session, and I know that colleagues are waiting. So thank you so much for everyone who was present and attended this session, especially to our 3 panelists. Good luck to everybody. Good luck for the remainder of the sessions and for a very successful annual plenary to our SAFIN colleagues and members. Okay, bye-bye to everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks to everyone.